Welcome to Agile Coach's Corner by AgileThought, the podcast for practitioners and leaders seeking advice to refine the way they work and pave the path to better outcomes. Now, here's your host, coach, and Agile expert, Dan Neumann.
Welcome to this episode of the Agile Coach's Corner. I'm your host, Dan Neumann, and today, Sam Falco and I are going to be doing a deep dive on the Scrum values.
Yes, we are.
Yes, we are. And before we do, though, we need to do the official disclaimer that these are my opinion and Sam's opinion, not necessarily those of AgileThought or other companies or other people.
That is correct.
We are duly disclaimed, Sam.
Yes, we are.
We can have some fun now.
Let's go.
All right. We talked about empirical process control and Scrum a few episodes ago.
We did.
And now we're going to go somewhere else.
Right. So one of the problems that a lot of people face with Scrum is that it can feel very mechanical. And there is a solution to that. There's a statement in the Scrum Guide that the successful use of Scrum depends on people becoming more proficient in living 5 values, the values that drive Scrum. And I want to talk about those today because they put the heart in Scrum. We have talked about gamifying Scrum as a way to get people engaged. We talked about empirical process control as what makes Scrum get stuff done. So let's talk about what puts the heart in Scrum.
All right. And those 5 values are going to be commitment, courage, focus, openness, and respect.
That's correct.
All right. Yeah. And I think to your point about putting the heart in Scrum, there's a lot of times when people are trying to, well, how long should we set aside for the retrospective? How much time should we take for a sprint review? How much time for planning? Like, people get really focused in on kind of the laws or the letter of the law, and they're kind of missing the values or missing the mindset behind that.
Right. Yeah, it's goes beyond the rules. It's interesting. The Scrum values have always been what makes Scrum work, but they weren't formally added to the Scrum Guide until I think 2 iterations ago that they added them as an explicit section in the Scrum Guide. It's not a very long section, but Ken Schwaber and Jeff Sutherland wanted to make it clear that it's not just a rules set. There is more to it. And so they put those in there. And I've been using them ever since then. I'd, of course, encounter them in various books. But when they put it in the guide, I was working for a company and they had asked me to do some training of some engineers in Scrum. And these engineers were a little resentful that they were being asked to sit through training of something they thought they already knew really well. And to be honest, they were following the rules pretty well, and they did know what the artifacts and the events were for. So that was great. But then I opened with an exercise on the Scrum values, and it actually made them rethink what they were doing and kind of got them to open up a little bit about why they were doing what they were doing. And I think that was a valuable addition, not just because it made my life easier, but because it really helped them to talk about some things that they hadn't really gotten into before.
Yeah. So the first one listed in the Scrum Guide is that of commitment. And one of the things I see is, and we'll talk about the Scrum teams themselves having some commitment to the framework, but I've seen a lot of organizations that get really twisted up on, well, this might not work or that might not work. And so they want to start manipulating the Scrum framework in situations where it's not necessarily going to be a problem. I don't know if that makes sense, but it's
Can you give me, for instance?
Fear. Oh, well, we can do Scrum, but there's really, we can't break the work down into a 2-week sprint. Or
Gotcha.
We're going to do Scrum, but we can't really dedicate capacity for a Scrum Master, or we'll do the daily Scrum once a week, or those types of things. Yeah, I think the concern comes from legitimate places and exposes other challenges within the organization that leads people to want to work around those challenges instead of having the commitment to go after them and figure out what's really behind the desire.
Yeah, and everybody has said this, so I'll say it. Scrum does not solve your problems. Scrum shows you where your problems are. You're supposed to fix the problem. And unfortunately, with Scrum, as with many other types of frameworks or methodologies, with even when they're heavier weight, what tends to happen is people are shown the problem and it's scary, it's hard. They start thinking we can't solve it. So as you said, they just drive around it. Drop the thing that shows you the problem. I had a friend in high school who solved the problem of her check engine light being on by putting a piece of electrical tape over it.
I almost bought a car that she probably owned.
Yeah, and the thing was, she couldn't afford to take it in to have it fixed. And she didn't want to see the light. So she, it wasn't ignorance. It was just like, I can't do anything about this. This is frustrating. So I'll put this over that and I won't see it. So I think people do the same thing with Scrum is, well, we've just shown that we have some problems getting to done. So we'll just drop the artifact, or we'll drop the sprint review, or we'll stop doing the retrospective because we need the time to get stuff done. Really? You can't spend 3 hours and you're going to get enough done in that 3 hours to justify not doing the retrospective. So we're talking about commitment, but we're also talking about courage to face up to an issue and solve it.
Yeah, I want to continue on the courage conversation in a second. As I was talking about commitment, though, and we talked about commitment to Scrum, there are instances where Scrum isn't the right framework.
Oh, absolutely.
And there's an interesting site that I came across recently, Agnostic Agile, and it's really, of course, it's got its own manifesto because that's what
we do.
We do, yes, and it kind of acknowledges, hey, here's the agility stuff, and the Agile manifesto is written not with a particular framework in mind, but with lots of different Agile methods. So you don't have to do Scrum, but if you're going to do Scrum, committing to the framework and committing to the team and team members committing to each other to try. There's a lot going on there. So I disclaimed the Scrum part now. Yeah, there you go.
Yeah. No, I agree. And going along with that, a lot of times I will see people say, well, we don't want to do Scrum, let's do Kanban. And what it turns out is they just don't want to do the discipline of Scrum. It's not because Kanban is the right framework. It's actually because Scrum is the right framework. They're just afraid of doing it, or less charitably, too lazy to do it.
And side note about Kanban. Holy crap, is that disciplined?
I mean,
right. The people who do Kanban and do it well are fanatical about measurement and improvement.
Right. And so what I've seen is teams will say, oh, we don't want to do Scrum, we're going to do Kanban. And what they mean is they're just going to get a bunch of stuff in progress and track it on a board. Well, they're not enforcing WIP limits. They're not doing any of the other things that makes Kanban its own discipline.
Mm-hmm.
The first time I ever worked with Kanban with a team, we had been using Scrum, and the problem was that we had so much production support work that was coming in for a variety of reasons that we couldn't plan a sprint that wasn't going to get blown up by something. So we adopted Kanban, but we adopted work in progress limits. We had a regular input queue input queue replenishment meeting to look at our backlog. I know we're getting off the topic of the values of Scrum, but to your point, Kanban was incredibly disciplined, and it allowed us to get back on track so that we then could look at it and say, now that we've got the product where we need it to be, and we've convinced some people that, leave us alone and we'll get things done, can we get back to Scrum?
Mm-hmm.
So,
see, I was going to bring that right back with a little Seinfeld episode. Woo, here we come back. So the openness part on the disruptions,
nice.
It's fairly common to have teams say, we're disrupted. Can't do it. But there is no transparency created. There's no openness or measurement of, here are the X number of things, the 10 things, the 15, the 100 things that disrupted us this week, this sprint, this month, so that then the system can be examined and maybe something can be done about all those disruptions.
Right.
And so it's kind of going from the analog war stories of all the disruptions we have to having the courage to make it transparent. So be open about where all those disruptions are coming from.
Sure. That's the kind of thing that can be brought up in a sprint retrospective. And if these are things that are beyond the team's capacity to control, the Scrum Master should take the lead in doing something about it. escalating that outside. If it really is something that needs to be communicated to the organization as a whole, you could discuss it in a sprint review. Here are things that are really causing us problems. Do you want us to be able to deliver good product to you? Then help us fix this.
Mm-hmm. And that openness in the sprint review is where I see the phrase sprint demo really lacking. The sprint review is so much more than a demo.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, we talked about that last time, so I think that it still holds. It's key to communicate beyond, here's what we built. Do you like it?
Yeah, and so that's where that openness part. So when teams are starting to think about, hey, what should we or shouldn't we be doing at this event that's at the end of the sprint and called the sprint review, are we embracing the value of openness?
Yeah.
And do we have the courage to, in some cases, go, the emperor has no clothes over here. Maybe we did fail to deliver a bunch of stuff we thought we were planning to. Let's share the whys. Let's share the issues we ran into, how we overcame them, where we need to escalate those.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, it goes way beyond the mechanics then of here are the 8 bullets of things that should happen in the sprint review.
Right. And this points to another thing, that the Scrum values are not just for the Scrum team. The entire organization needs to be aware of and adopt these values, that it's important to make Scrum work, that everybody values openness, that everybody values the commitment and the courage, the focus, the respect. Because if it's just the Scrum team doing it, just as when we have a Scrum team inside a organization that has not adopted an Agile mindset, they will quickly become frustrated. If we have a team that is living the Scrum values, but everybody else is not, there's going to be problems.
Yeah, that openness requires the safety to be open about it.
Yes.
Yeah, and in highly politicized organizations, that takes a lot of intestinal fortitude.
It does.
Yep.
Yeah, I've been very fortunate in my career that most of the places I have worked have valued that. They have wanted to hear the bad news if it was important. The CEO of one company I worked for, he would always say, if you have good news and bad news, I want to hear the bad news first, because that's the thing I need to do something about. And you could tell him really bad news, and your head would not go on the chopping block for it. It would be, this is data, this is important information, let's see what we can do about it and examine it because it's there, rather than, how dare you tell me bad news? I don't want to hear that.
Agreed. So we've covered to some degree commitment, courage, and openness. That leaves us focus and respect.
Yes.
Choose your poison.
But they're not poison, Dan.
Well played. Well played. Choose your anti-poison.
Choose your anti-poison. Let's talk about, let's leave respect for last, and maybe I'll sing a little Aretha Franklin for you. Let's talk about focus.
Yes.
Let's talk about focus, because that is, that's really difficult. Everyone focuses on the work of the sprint and the goals of the Scrum team, is what it says in the Scrum Guide. And that's a simple statement, but what does it actually mean?
For me, I find that a lot of times there's that lack of transparency about what is actually happening. What are the product backlog items that are in the sprint? Are the acceptance criteria clear? What is in, what is out? So that we are able to focus on meeting the acceptance criteria, Agile value of maximizing the amount of work not done, or Agile principle. And how do we focus on doing just what's necessary to get that PBI over to done, to be included in the increment?
Sure. It's real easy to want to gold plate things. I mean, it's fun sometimes to, what can I get this? What else can I get this to? Or, hey, I'm in this area of code. I can do this other thing that I know it's in the backlog and I know it's not in the sprint, but I can do it right now. Well, it may not be the most valuable thing to do, so we want to focus on just what's in the sprint goal. And that's another factor that you want to consider, is the sprint, what's in the sprint goal, the classic 3 questions of the daily Scrum are not just what did I do yesterday, what am I going to do today, are there any impediments? But there's another part of that, and it's has to do with the sprint goal. What did I do yesterday to help the team get to the sprint goal? And so focus is all about keeping your eye on that and being aware of what work will not help you get there. And if you start running into trouble, start getting rid of some of that stuff that doesn't matter because it doesn't have to do with the sprint goal.
When the daily Scrum starts to feel really mechanical and status reporty, often it's an example of a lack of focus where we start talking about, or the team starts talking about, all the status of everything in the backlog or everything in the sprint backlog, and not really focused on, hey, here's the action, here's the stuff I delivered in the last 24 hours. Here's the stuff I'm going to be delivering in the next 24 hours. Here's where I need help. It goes on this wandering, hey, let's do how are we doing on this one and this one and this one, whether they've moved or not.
Right. And oh God, I had one guy who would tell you what he had for lunch. He viewed this as
I thought you wanted to hear that.
Stage. I mean, it was everything, and it was really hard if you didn't cut him off. He would take up the whole 15 minutes by himself, and he took a lot of coaching. I kept having to talk to him afterwards. Hey, remember, this is what we're here for, and it even came up in retrospective more than once. Hey, I'm not going to say his name, just in case he listens to the show. He probably knows who he is, but nobody else needs to.
He's not a bad guy. We still respect him.
No, I do. One of the smartest guys I know, but he just would just tell you everything. And like, that was not what the purpose of the meeting
Might be fun
is.
for sitting down and having a brew and kind of hearing about, the lunch escapades, but not fodder for the daily Scrum.
Yeah. So no side work is part of focus, and then just keeping your eye on that sprint goal.
Side work, you say? Tell me more about that side work.
Oh gosh,
be open about this side work. What?
So, what we used to call shoulder tap, where someone comes over and says, "Hey, could you just taps the developer on the shoulder and says, "Hey, could you just do this one little thing and really help me?" That's one way that manifests. Some ways it can manifest is just developers just get really interested in something and they go chasing rabbits. We had a guy on one of my Scrum teams who really smart guy, but he had to have everything. And when he gave you something, it was bulletproof. I was doing some QA and you could not find a problem with it, but it was more than was needed because he would nail down everything and just go down all these beautiful little trails. His code was too good, I guess. Too pretty.
Interesting.
Have a topic you want us to tackle? Send an email to podcast@agilethought.com or tweet it with the hashtag AgileThoughtPodcast.
One of the ways focus can be a little bit of a challenge for me. I don't know if that's true for everybody in the world, but it is for me. And I find that having a task breakdown for myself really helps with that focus. So, regardless of whether it's, if you're a Scrum team member and it's on the Scrum board, or whether you're doing some kind of personal Kanban or just your to-do list, it's like, hey, here's the thing that I'm working on now. And it's visible. It's like, oh yeah, that's the thing. I'll go do that, move it, and then go back to the list for the next thing. Lest one go to news.google.com and, get lost in the latest escapades of Washington, or
it's something that I'm gonna go off on a little tangent here myself. So I'm gonna lack focus for a minute, but a pet peeve of mine. It back. Yeah, my pet peeve of mine is when apps change their colors and icons. So recently, Office for my iOS changed all the colors. So what happens is I go to open up an application and I can't find it because I'm looking for what used to not be there. And then I get distracted and I go off chasing rabbits. So I don't know. That really doesn't have anything to do with what we're talking about. There's an example of lack of focus.
Did one pill make you bigger and one pill make you small? Well,
yes.
Good stuff.
So to tie that back,
I still respect you, though.
Okay. Nice. Well played.
Thank you. We will get to respect. So focus, grasshopper.
Yes.
So so there's the focus of the daily scrum.
Yep.
The focus of the sprint itself. We're establishing a sprint goal. We're making it explicit. We have the product backlog items with their acceptance criteria that are explicit as well. And so lots of focus there. And as well, the shoulder tap thing, when it can be tricky with positional power, but when you've got the shoulder tap, it can be, hey, here's all the other stuff that I'm doing already.
Yeah.
Let's, how does your new request fit in with all these? Because I know people pretend to multitask, but it's just rapid context switching, which is brutal.
It is, because then you get into the problem of attention residue. You're doing one thing, you try to switch to another thing, and part of your mind is still back on that original problem, and it means you're not as effective at either problem right then. So yeah, focus is important, and that is one of the reasons why I often recommend personal Kanban boards, especially if you're in a disruptive environment where people are walking by. It's really helpful to have that up on your desk. So one place I worked, the woman that I was reporting to was really keen to make sure that she understood what people were doing, so that if you had anything she could do for you that you needed, she could help. But it was a little, she would come over, what are you working on? So I had a Kanban, I could just point, this is what I'm working on. And actually, once I put that up, she never asked, what are you working on? She'd come by, look at the Kanban board, and if I was on a call or something, she'd give me a thumbs up and a question, the little questioning glance, and I'd give her a thumbs up back. And if I needed something, I'd wave her over. So it was a great communication tool and helped me focus on what I was doing, because I will go off on tangents.
And with Scrum teams, having a meaningful backlog, having well-defined PBIs, having a Scrum board and sprint reviews, that can save, I know it takes time, but that saves a phenomenal amount of energy with answering the question. So what's the status on this? What's the status on that? What's the You'll die that way. So just make it transparent.
Yeah, in organizations that have physical task boards and Scrum boards up on the wall, it's great for management if they're doing that Gemba walk to see what's going on, to be able to just walk by, look at the thing, say, oh, this team's on track. That's great. Here's what they're working on. I love using the sprint goal that way too, to just post that on top of your Scrum board, so that, again, management can see what's this team working on. Also helps on elevator pitches when you run into someone and they say, what is your team working on? You don't have to hem and haw. Just tell them the sprint goal. So that really helps with focus and helps with transparency as well.
I want to talk about this respect thing.
Okay. What do you want to say?
Right behind you.
So let's take a look again.
Go ahead. Yeah.
I was going to say, let's take a look at what it says in the Scrum Guide. Scrum team members respect each other to be capable, independent people. So it's a very particular type of respect that we're talking about here.
Yeah, it is about the professionalism, and I think being able to share where you do have dependencies is really important. So worst case scenario, a Scrum team member is not comfortable declaring a weakness or a limitation or a need for assistance, and they flounder, which will quickly damage the respect that their teammates have for them. Building a reputation for that person doesn't deliver. Right.
And part of that respect is that not expecting everyone to know what you know. We've all had different experiences. We have, even if we've been working in the same area, maybe, that's a library you've never worked with. Okay, that's not that you're a bad person or you're a bad programmer or that you're in some way deficient. You just haven't experienced that. Okay, great. Let's do something about it. If you need to use it, let's help you get up to speed. So that's part of that respect.
I do think it creates a bit of a challenge that we expect Scrum team members to be capable and independent, and then we're asking them in the daily Scrum to identify places where they need help or impediments they're having. And I kind of think that creates a potential conflict.
Well, capable doesn't mean omniscient. So we're expecting to be capable and independent, but that doesn't mean we're expecting them to know everything that's going on. So, or that yeah, I mean, it's all about learning.
Agreed.
I don't think that's a conflict at all.
I just wonder about how that factors into people who are seemingly reluctant for some reason or another to identify impediments or to identify where they could actually use help with some folk, with another team member coming in to assist, or
Yeah, I mean, some of it is there may be conflict. People are not always comfortable with conflict. God knows I struggle with it. It's hard, and so there's a little fear there. And I think what Respect is saying is that we try to keep that in mind, that we know that's going to be difficult. And okay, so if you need some help dealing with that, maybe you go to someone privately. You go to the Scrum Master and say, "Hey, I'm really struggling with this person, and we just don't seem to be able to communicate. Can you sit in and facilitate?" That is respectful as long as it's not slagging someone behind their back.
One of the activities we did when kicking off a team was an exercise called What I Can Offer and What I Need, which is exactly that. Each person on the team on a little sheet of paper, it's a silent writing activity. Here's what I can offer to the team, and they would identify that. So an opportunity then to discover some strengths or some abilities that your teammates have that otherwise might not have come up. And then here's what I need from my teammates. And so as an Agile coach for this team, like one of the things I needed from them was a little bit of this courage and curiosity, which curiosity is not one of the Scrum values, but I need people being curious and willing to participate in this adoption of Scrum for that team. But it created a lot of opportunity for empathy and understanding and respect for, hey, here's this person's skill, here's what this person brings to the table, and then, I see maybe how I can support them as well.
Yeah. Yeah, and I can give an anecdote also of a way that respect kind of manifested, and it had to do with conflict. I was on a team, and there was an analyst on the team who was really struggling with how we were setting up. That's because we were just spinning this project up. And something I said irked her. And she said, "You are the least agile coach I've ever met." And I could have been really offended by that, but I recognize that everybody has their own perspective. And I was truly curious as to what she meant by that. So I said, "Tell me how." And we started talking, and then it got a little heated. And we both kind of looked at each other, and I said, Let's start drawing on the whiteboard, because we were facing the whiteboard, not each other, and we worked through the problem. I understood her perspective, why she felt I was being too rigid, and we worked through the problem. We actually found a solution that neither of us had thought of in the first place, because I respected her as a person, as the Scrum Guide says, to be capable and independent. I knew she wasn't just trying to get under my skin. She was frustrated about something, and we worked through it, and we had a great working relationship as a result of that.
That's fantastic. Thank you for sharing. So we've got the Scrum values of commitment, courage, openness, focus, and respect in an ongoing journey. So for those people who are on Scrum teams or working with Scrum teams, really taking a chance to dive deep on those and see where they're present and where they can be strengthened.
Yeah, if you're wondering about that, bring it up in retrospective. Here are the Scrum values. Are we doing these? Is there one we need to work on together as a team? You may be surprised what you find, and that can lead to a deeper conversation and a better Scrum team.
I like asking the question for some examples. So similarly, on the values, here, give us some examples where they've been really present and maybe some examples where they haven't. Because a lot of times within organizations or within teams, you'll end up with a spectrum. Here's one that was really awesome where we really nailed the value, and here was the exact opposite. And so then you've got some rich fodder for a conversation.
Right, and that was how I introduced them to that team I was talking about earlier that had never seen that and were a little resentful. I said, here are the values. Here's what it says. I just gave them what it says in the Scrum Guide. I didn't give any elaboration on it. And I just said, get in pairs and talk about, I had them draw slips of paper with one of them on them. Talk about a time when you've seen this. And if you really can't think of a time when you have, talk about a time when you wish you had seen it.
Yeah, that's another good way. Imagine that it had happened in this scenario. How would that have been different?
Yeah.
Cool. Well, our time has flown, at least for me, Sam.
It has. Yeah.
I'm
stunned.
Going to tease a couple upcoming episodes that we will have. We'll have a practicing psychologist who works with sports teams, with athletes. So I'm hoping to explore Tom Izzo's coaching behavior in the recent tournament that happened, where he just berated one of the freshman players coming off. So I think it'll be interesting to explore coaching and maybe some of the differences with the agile coaching versus kind of athlete coaching. And so we're going to explore that. And then we have a signer of the Agile Manifesto that we are just busy guy, but we're going to get that one in here too in the next couple of weeks.
Yeah, really looking forward to that.
I won't name drop. We'll do it another time.
Okay.
All right. Well, Sam, what are you reading these days on your either fiction or nonfiction continuous learning journey?
Been pretty much strictly nonfiction lately. I am working towards becoming a professional Scrum trainer, so I'm doing a lot of reading to improve my knowledge of Scrum and really become to grips with it. One thing that I reread, The Servant as Leader, Robert Greenleaf, since we talk about servant leadership a lot, and I'd love to talk about that sometime with you. There's a lot deeper conversation to be had than we often do, because it's a very deep, profound concept. And then I just started reading Agile Project Management with Scrum by Ken Schwaber. And this is a book I should have read a long time ago. And last time I was on the show, I teased you about having not read 1984 before. And so I'm reading this and realizing, okay, I don't have a leg to stand on, because this is something that I should have read. And so I apologize.
Yes. That was my first Scrum book.
Awesome.
Oh, it was. That my introduction to Scrum was, the big boss at the company. It was not a consultancy, but he was like, hey, we're doing Agile. We're going to use Scrum, and it's going to be 2-week sprints. Go. That was the training. And Agile Project Management with Scrum was kind of that was my first book, and helped me a ton understand what the Scrum thing was we're going to be using.
Yeah, I love that it's just case study after case study. And what again is just appalling to me that I haven't read it before now was there were so many times when I thought, if I could just get some case studies on Scrum. Well, it was in a book that had been recommended to you and has been on your reading list for a decade.
Yeah, but it's a skinny book. Those are my favorite. So I also, because we were having this conversation on servant leadership and really wanting to understand that more deeply, the Greenleaf brochure, which is like 60-ish pages printed, that's a length I can consume. And Agile Project Management with Scrum was not too heavy a book either for me. So there have been Agile books where I'm like, that was 500 pages of my life I will never get back.
Right.
And we'll make that list public. But so Agile Project Management with Scrum is definitely one of the valuable books that I've read.
Yeah. You reading anything?
Nope.
Still not reading anything. You're a busy guy.
What am I? Well, that's not an excuse. It's just a matter of priorities. Everybody's busy. I have been running a lot, and I don't know. I tend to do a lot of thinking when I'm running. I'm not an earphones playing music for the most part kind of person. But yeah, consuming a little bit of Agile podcasting, and just kind of enjoying the scenery and the pace of running.
Nice.
Keeps me sane-ish. Ish. There's lessons in there. So my uncle got inducted into the Alpena, which is a city in Michigan, the Sports Hall of Fame up there. And he was kind of talking. He's an endurance athlete. He's done. He started with marathon and then went to 50K, 50 mile, 100 mile, and he's even done some dabbling in 24 and 48 hour endurance events. Which yeah. When marathoners introduce him as, you won't believe what this goofy bastard does, like it's a special kind of goofy. But his thing, one of the things in his very short acceptance speech was about, look, when he gets to the line, he just wants to keep moving till he gets to the finish. And I think there's a lot for Scrum teams, for people in general in that, because the marathon distance, you don't master the marathon distance. It's 26.2 miles, and you can have a plan, and that's cute, but stuff happens when you're out there, and it's much like software. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, if you've never read the short story, The Loneliness of the Long Distance Runner by Alan Stillito, I highly recommend that. It is about a kid from Nottingham, working class kid who doesn't have a lot of prospects, and he turns to running, long distance running, as a way to work out some of his emotional and physical problems. Really a moving story. There was a film, I think, in the 60s, but the short story is worth reading.
I'll have to check that one out. The other thing that brought to mind for me is in what I think it might have been in the book Endure, which is it's consumable, but it's a lot of science about running. And it talks about how the American runners tend to approach racing differently than African runners do, in that a lot of American runners will have decided what their time is going to be before they even start the race.
Interesting.
And whereas some other cultures, there's so much potential upside to winning that flaming out partway through because you went out too hard is okay. So for a lot of I don't want to call them armchair runners, but because it takes a lot still. But for a lot of runners, it's deciding what you're going to do before you go in, as opposed to going as hard as you can. And maybe you have your best day and it's amazing, and maybe you flame out on the side of the road, but you've gone with all you can. And so I think that's an interesting mindset too. Yeah. I'm not sure. I don't know. There's a little bit of waterfall something in there with just kind of having the plan all laid out for what you're going to do, as opposed to just going for it. But, I don't know. Maybe overthinking it. But with that, till next time, Sam.
Take it easy.
This has been the Agile Coaches Corner podcast, brought to you by AgileThought. Get the show notes and other helpful tips from this episode and other episodes at agilethought.com/podcast.